So Mike Farrell, I lead digital performance marketing at Rite. So I have a very lean team of 9 people, and they help me oversee the strategy and execution of digital marketing across the entire enterprise. So the pharmacy side of the business, front-end retail, e-commerce, all of our third party, and we also support digital marketing for our smaller sister pharmacy, Bartell's in Seattle. From a channel scope perspective, it runs the gamut. We oversee everything from search, SEO, shopping, affiliate marketing, programmatic, all of our media partnerships, obviously email, SMS, everything social, paid, organic, influencer, all of the social care, community management, crisis escalation through social, and then content marketing as well. So it's a pretty broad scope. But obviously here to talk a little bit about email today. When I first started talking to the Media Post team about coming here and kind of what sort of content I could kind of speak about, we kicked around a bunch of ideas. Everything from like what Rite-Aid's doing from like a journey optimization perspective, what we're doing from a personalization perspective, a lot of the stuff that you've already heard being talked about so far and probably what you'll hear throughout the rest of the week. But I had this idea about talking about what we had just gone through at Rite-Aid through migrating our email service platform. And it was the first time that I had ever done it in my role and also being the primary business leader that was helping see this process through. So it was definitely an interesting process, and I learned a lot. You know, we made some mistakes, and we had a really great team both internally, but also our platform provider also helped see us through it. But there's definitely some nuances through the process that looking back on it, I'm hoping that maybe I can shed some light on those things and then people can take those learnings with them as they move forward. So the first part that I want to talk about is this concept of decisions before discovery. This is kind of your run-of-the-mill, timeline from a platform migration perspective, and usually the first thing that takes place in that process is the contract. Now, things will happen before this. You'll run an RFP, you'll bring other tools in, and you'll ask questions, dig a little deeper, poke, prod. But ultimately, you come to the place where you need to sign a contract. And you do this before you kind of get down the road and you really figure out some of the nuts and bolts of what you're actually going to be accomplishing after the fact. And for our particular platform, it has a built-in CDP and an offer decisioning engine. So there's lots of nuances about the way the contract can be scheduled or negotiated, and there's lots of kind of pricing things that come up. Usually, when you sign for a new deal, there's kind of a baseline platform price, and it's kind of all-inclusive, right? Like it includes a lot of things up to a certain point, but then there are also things where there are extra costs involved if you go over certain thresholds, things like profile limits or data richness limits, number of domains you can have, number of data sources you can attach to the platform before you start to incur incremental costs. So it's really important as you go into the process of migrating platforms and trying to understand how you're going to use that platform, not just in the near term, but in the future as well, that you understand some of these elements because you're going to be forced to kind of negotiate these contracts before you understand a lot of those things. So the more research you can do upfront is super important because you don't want to find yourself saying like, how am I going to pay all these extra bills when you're only partway through the process. The other two things that I want to call out just with regards to, we'll skip it. But the other two things I want to call out just before I move on to this next thing is when you go through the platform migration process, there's two like minor things. One is being aware of kind of the concept of the roadmap. I worked at a startup for 10 years before I came to Rite-Aid. And there's always this concept of selling ahead and kind of selling what's coming next or coming down the pipeline. And it's just really important to understand that all companies do that, but being really clear with whatever platform you're choosing to make sure you understand when those very specific things are coming, because if you're building that into your plan and they're not coming for a longer period of time, you need to make sure you set those expectations internally with leadership as well as your team and all that other stuff. The next big thing that I wanted to talk about is this concept of not underestimating the workload or the timeline of this process. It's a very, very complicated process. There's lots and lots of people involved. From from a team perspective, I think it pretty much touches almost every team within your organization. And it's very important that, one, you kind of outline the roles and responsibilities of all the people that are going to be involved, and you do it up front right away, because the last thing you want to be doing is trying to bring people into the process after it's already started, because there's lots of catching up to do and lots of decisions that have already been made. So you want to make sure all these people are in loop and up front and involved right away. The other thing is building this top part of this slide is this hierarchy of kind of a decision-making structure as you go through the process, because the working team day to day are going to be running into challenges and trying to get questions answered. And if you have a good tiered structure where when those challenges come up, they can go into kind of almost like a board where people can figure out how to solve those problems quickly right away, because the last thing you want to do is have this timeline drag on for a long period of time, because then other challenges can come up along the way. And the last thing I will say about this particular piece is 100%, if you're going to do this process, go throughout your entire organization and find the best, most rock star project manager you can possibly have, because it is a very, very complicated process, and you need somebody that's on the ball and understands how all these things work, how to work with teams, and how to pull all these people together to keep everything moving down the train. The third part that I want to talk a little bit is everybody talked about this kind of in the earlier presentations, but this concept of data discovery and planning. This is probably the most important part of the entire process. It's obviously, from a marketer perspective, data is the lifeblood that kind of helps fuel all the campaign and all of the strategy as you move forward. And a lot of times, you see data structures in organizations that look something like this mess on the screen, right? And from a Rite perspective, we have lots of parts and pieces of our organization, and all this data comes together in kind of a little bit of a messy kind of architecture in the background. And this architecture has probably been built over time, and lots of different people have been involved in the architecture process who have probably come and gone in the organization. And also, the complexity of this process makes it really difficult when you're trying to make some decisions about kind of migrating major campaigns through this process. So the most important part about going through that process is that from a business owner perspective, you are showing up all throughout this integration process, in particularly the data discovery meetings, as well as all of the technical implementation meetings. And for me, even some of those conversations can go over my head in a lot of ways. But it's very, very important that you're there and you're in those conversations, you're asking questions, you're asking clarifying questions to make sure what the decisions are being made from a data perspective are actually what you need for the output for the future of where you want your program to go. And just as an example, like marketers, and someone mentioned this earlier in an earlier presentation, but marketers and kind of the technical or data folks, they have very different ways of going about solving problems and figuring solutions out. And this example on the one side of the screen is kind of an actual conversation that took place through our process, where from a business owner perspective, we went to the team and we wanted to say, we need transaction data because we want to execute all of this offer decisioning based on a customer's purchase history. And the technical resource, without missing a beat, said, great, we already have that in the file that's already going to the platform. We're good to go. And we could have stopped there and just left that conversation gone because they said it with such confidence, and we could have moved on. But we asked a clarifying question. So what type of transactional data is there? And they said, we have all the order level detail. It's all being passed in the file. It's there. We're good to go. And again, we asked one more clarifying question. And we said, when you say order level detail, you mean like all the order level detail, right? And they said, yes. We've got the transaction ID, the customer ID, the order total, the number of units. We have everything. And again, we could have stopped there. We asked one more clarifying question, which is ultimately the point, which is, do you have all the details of what that person purchased? The product ID, the brand, the category, the subcategory, all the things that we would want as marketers to trigger all of our campaigns off of into the future. And the answer was no, that data is not actually in the file that was going to the platform. That was a separate file that would have needed to have been pulled in and merged. So again, it's very important. This is kind of a dumbed down version of it, but really it's important just to be asking these clarifying questions as you're going through the process to make sure that you're getting what you want. A couple other things just to keep in mind as you're thinking about the data from a platform perspective is where is the actual data source of record in that kind of a mess of an architecture that I showed on the last slide, right? Like where is that data point originating from? Is that the data point that's being kept up to date regularly? Because that data point can live in multiple places in that architecture. You want to make sure that that data point where you're pulling it from to send it to your ESP is the record where it's going to be kept up to date. And then other things that you should be asking is how often that data point's being refreshed, so you know how often you can use it when you're triggering campaigns. Is it a batch process? Is it real time? How much history is around those data points, right? Are you importing 30 days worth of data, or are you importing 2 years worth of data? And it really depends on what you're doing with the data, but ultimately you need to refine all of those questions down to those very specific points to make sure that, again, at the end result, when you come out on the other side of your platform migration, that you have all of the things that you need to make sure that you're delivering on your campaign goals. And then also things like, are there fail-safes from an API perspective, right? Are those data points that are being refreshed, if that refresh fails for whatever reason, are there safeguards to make sure that you're not triggering campaigns off data that could be old or stale? The next part is the transition process. And this is kind of this idea of tale of two platforms, right? There's a period of time when you go through this process where you're straddling two platforms. And that can be a challenge for a whole host of reasons, and you need to make sure that you're aware of it so you're prepared when you go through it. The first thing is reporting and analytics, right? You're on two different platforms, so your emails are running through one platform, and you have a couple emails that are running on this platform. You still need to be able to have a full picture of your whole program as a whole, but you also want to be able to measure and see what the difference is between the two and make sure that the campaigns you're migrating from one platform to the other are performing appropriately and they're not missing a beat. The data flow for campaign and offer decisioning is also important, right? So if you're on one platform and you have campaigns that are triggering off things like email click data or email open data, and you migrate those campaigns over to a new platform, a lot of times those systems are not talking to each other, so those campaigns aren't going to be able to recognize that, you know, customer 123 clicked on an email in the last couple of days. So it's really important that you understand that. A couple other nuances there, obviously making sure that your opt-out list is synced up to both platforms, and you're making sure that when campaigns are going out, that opt-out list is the most up-to-date on both platforms so that you're not mailing people that you shouldn't be. And along the similar lines, if you're running campaigns in two different platforms, you don't want to over-mail your customers. You want to make sure that your segmentation is done appropriately. You have all your exclusion lists in the right place so that, you know, Mike Farrell is not getting an email from platform 1 and platform 2 on the same day, multiple days a week, because that could just lead to increases in opt-outs. Couple other small things, integrations on your old platform. If you have integrations that are working really well in partnerships and you need those for go-forward campaign planning or campaign execution, I should say, you want to make sure that those same integrations are in place in the new platform, and if they're not, you're accommodating that in the process. Sometimes there'll be plugins, and that's great. Other times there might be custom work that needs to be done, which again, needs to be built into your process as you move forward. And then define timelines. And this is slightly different than what I talked about earlier, but more importantly, once a campaign starts to get to the end, and if you're over your timeline and you're behind schedule, there's a couple things that could happen, and it happened to us, is you start to lose technical resources that were allocated to your project because they're moving to other projects, and that's just the nature of the beast. But at the end of the day, you lose that consistency of the people that are working on this project, and it just slows things down more. So it's really, really important that you do everything you can to keep your particular project on track and staying from a timeline perspective. And then also, we ran into code freeze. We didn't plan to do it, but our project was a little bit behind schedule, and we ended up having to stop a lot of the things that we were doing because code freeze came and we had to wait for a month and then kick off project off again. And again, that was, a really difficult thing to do. And then the last thing I'll say on the transition piece, obviously you're moving from one platform to another because you're trying to up-level what you're doing from a marketing perspective, and there's lots of additional things that come along with that. When you move to a platform that has more complexity and offer decisioning, and you're trying to do all these really cool things from a marketing perspective, you end up needing more templates, and more templates create more resource needs. Those templates need to be populated with creative, and then creative at scale becomes a problem because now you have all these things that you want to do, and you have new challenges that arise. So you need to make sure that you're thinking about that as you move forward through that transition process. And then the last thing is kind of more on the human side. I'm very much a relationship person, both internal as well as with all of my vendors. I truly believe that people go the extra mile for people that they like. So it's important that you treat people with respect through the process, and you recognize that this is a long, grueling process, and everybody that's involved, both on the platform side as well as your internal teams, there's lots of things that need to be taken into consideration. So for me personally, it was really important to kind of lead through that process and make sure that you were motivating your team, from the very beginning, making sure they're understanding what the outcomes are going to be, what the value to the business is going to be once you make it through this process, and continue to reiterate that all the way through the migration process. Showing appreciation through the process as well, again, both on the vendor side as well as your internal teams. There's a lot of people working hard. Celebrate the wins, celebrate the milestones along the way. It's what keeps the momentum through the process. And also when you have people that, like our project managers were really great through the process, and it was always really important to kind of pull them aside or call them on Zoom on a personal level and just tell them that you really appreciate all the work that they are doing behind the scenes, because it's super important and it goes a long way towards keeping people motivated. The third thing here, being present from a kind of business leader perspective in this process. You set expectations for your teams that you need those people in all of those meetings all throughout the process, and they show up, right? And you need to make sure that you're showing up too. You can't be skipping out on meetings here and there because maybe, the data discovery is not, out of my wheelhouse or whatever. You have to be there. You have to be there to ask those questions, like I said before, but also to make sure that everybody realizes that this is an important project for you, for the business, and if you're going to set the expectation that these people need to show up and be there, then you need to be there too. If you can't be there, which will happen, make sure you respond to the recap emails that are coming out of those meetings. Make sure that you're checking in with all of your kind of core players in the process so that everyone understands that you're involved and you have your eye on everything that's going on. And then the last thing is just having empathy. Like I said at the beginning, there's a lot of people in this process, and a lot of these people have day jobs. This is just one project in the mix of a lot of other things that they're going to be working on. So recognizing that that's the case, and making sure that they all understand that. So just to kind of wrap up, watch out as you're going through the kind of contract process. Be cognizant of those kind of small upcharges that take place, and go into that process prepared to negotiate those things and understanding what they mean, how much data you're going to need, how many data sources you're going to be linking to your platform, and all that good stuff. Again, huge project. Make sure you pick a solid team, pick a rock star manager or a project manager, and also make sure you have that leadership structure so that you can clear the hurdles and the roadblocks so the project stays on track. From a data perspective, the devil's in the details there. Ask those clarifying questions. Make sure you're getting to the heart of where you want your program to be a year or two out so that you have the right data in place from the beginning. Again, beware of straddling those two platforms for all the reasons that I said earlier. There's lots of nuance there. Just be prepared for all those things so that you don't have any challenges. And then lastly, just don't forget to be human through the process, and it'll help everything go a lot more smoothly. Thank you.
Mike, thank you so much. I never would have known this is your first time public speaking. You crushed it. You crushed it. Yeah, another round of applause. This is also the second Schitt's Creek meme, and I am just here for this vibe, guys. Thank you so much for that.
Ryan, RPO, whatever. So one of the biggest challenges in migrations is herding the cats and the groupthink that goes on. Everybody having an opinion about how something should be set up. And how did you manage that in an organization like yours to make sure that the timelines didn't slip and that you didn't just get mired in endless meetings that racked your brain?
Yep. I think it goes back to really identifying who are the core people in the process that are basically going to be accountable for it, right? From a business owner perspective, I was one of them, and then I had a counterpart who was our VP of technology, who kind of oversaw all the data people and the technology people that were helping with the implementation. And I think it really came down to the two of us being aligned and everyone in the organization recognizing that, like, this is our project and ultimately someone needs to be accountable and decisions need to be made, and that just has to be the way that it is. We'll take everybody's opinion into account and we'll try to account for all those things, but at the end of the day, somebody needs to pull the trigger and make decisions. Otherwise, you end up in just analysis paralysis and you don't get anything done. So,
Great.
yeah.
Nice job, by the way.
Thank you.
Hey, Mike, Randy with Zambula. I kind of grew up in the ESP space in 2000. How important was your account manager at the new vendor to you in the whole process? Because that's usually the biggest piece of advice I usually give. Like, find out who that is, because that's usually a big differentiator.
Yep. Definitely a good point and huge. And it's not just the account manager. It's usually a team of people in this process. That org chart that I put up there, that was Rite Aid people on one side, and your ESP should be kind of matching person for person from a role perspective, right? So if you got a data person, they have a data person. If you have a project manager, they have a project manager, and all the way down the list to make sure that all those people have counterparts where they can bounce ideas off of each other, so that all that decision making happens in a very collaborative environment.
Any other questions? All right, one more, of course, right? I just leave that area of the room and then. I thought so, yeah, I'm a little lacking on the steps.
Lisa Bouljon, RPE Origin. Nice job, Mike.
Thank you.
Quick question. Did you have to have a C-suite sponsor to help make sure that this happened within the organization, or were you the person?
No, we had a C-suite sponsor. Our head of digital and product was a big part of it, and also very tied into our platform's leadership as well. Yeah.
Mike, thank you so much.
Thank you.